city clerk, a city council member, and our local historian about Wheat Ridge politics and Wheat Ridge history. So Louise Turner.
Aye.
And it's my pleasure again to introduce you to Jim Richey. And as I said in the other room, I don't need a fact sheet on Jim because many of the things that we do here in the city of Lakewood were as a result of Jim's leadership as the first mayor. And we've always had this thought that we have to be an ethical city, and we also have to be a city that runs as efficiently as possible on the taxpayer dollars. Jim not only was very successful as an elected official, but Jim was also an executive with Procter & Gamble for many years, and still resides in the area here and has a lovely wife. Betty, how many years you been married now, Jim?
63.
63 years, so that's just great. So, but she's a delightful person, and you know, one of the delightful things of being in elected office is you do develop new friends and you do develop new acquaintances, and that's been I think one of the things I'll walk away from here in November saying, I probably would have never gotten to know Jim as well as I do if I hadn't have been elected to the Lakewood City Council and then to mayor. So you're in for a treat. These two people here will tell you some of the fun things that occurred and the stories you never read about in the newspapers. So Jim, Louise?
St. Peter got a group of about 50 men together, and he said, you know, I don't understand what's going on. He said, the Lord created you in his image, and yet women have dominated you. He said, I want those of you who feel dominated to go over at this side, and those of you that are not this side. One lonely guy goes over here. St. Peter says, congratulations. What do you attribute your ability to come over here? He said, my wife told me to. Well, my wife told me to let Louise go first.
So, many of the people that Jim and I worked with, both in the incorporation attempts and in the early days of the cities, are gone. So you have to keep in mind that we were kids when this was going on. The first attempt to incorporate Wheat Ridge and Lakewood was in 1959, and no one was ready for it. In fact, it was highly unpopular. When the results boiled down, it went down 5-1. However, in Wheat Ridge, it went down 9-1, so that gives you a pretty good idea that nobody was ready to be city. 2 years later, and that was to have been Wheat Ridge and Lakewood in one big city called Ridgewood. So that one was history. 2 years later, the citizens of each community made an attempt at incorporation for Wheat Ridge alone and Lakewood alone. And those both went down, but not by a very large margin. Then in 1969, everything changed. And Jim, maybe you have an idea of what was different in 69 as opposed to the other years.
Well, the city and county of Denver at that time did not have any restrictions about annexation. They could go anywhere and as far as they wanted to. And they were taking a pretty good eye at what's now Lakewood and Wheat Ridge or Eastern Jefferson County. And the residents of Eastern Jefferson County, I think two things impacted that 69 election. One had to do with police protection. There was an individual that they named the garage rapist. He had attacked several women during daylight hours, and each time he'd find them in their garages. The police protection at that time was furnished by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, and at any one shift of what's now that geography, there was about the equivalent of 1.5 patrol cars. So it gives you very, very little police protection. The second thing, and perhaps of even greater impact, was the residents of Jefferson County were very proud of their school system. And if Denver had annexed this area, the school system would go with the geography. So I think those two those two things, the police protection and the school system, when the voter went into the booth, that made an impact on how they cast their ballot.
The other half of that 1.5 cars that took care of Lakewood under the sheriff, police cars, took care of Wheat Ridge, quote, and the surrounding areas. So we had very little police protection. And we called this fellow the garage gorilla in Wheat Ridge, and he was in the paper quite often, and that was definitely a factor. The other thing that happened, somebody named Pauline LeBlanc, and I assume nobody in this room except maybe 3 of us ever heard of Pauline LeBlanc, but she began a project to have all of what was then known as Wheat Ridge and Lakewood annexed into Denver, and actually filed a petition which would have taken all of us in. And in Wheat Ridge, it became a matter of defensive action to be incorporated. Nobody in Wheat Ridge wanted to be a city. Nobody wanted to have a lot of laws. Nobody wanted to change the way of life. We loved the unstructured county life and the fact that everybody that wanted to escape Denver came to the county for the relaxed living of Jefferson County. But we wanted the protection that we could not be annexed into another community. And we didn't know whether we were going to be annexed into Denver or not. Ultimately, Denver turned us down. They said it would be too expensive. But by the time that action was taken, the move for incorporation had gotten a pretty good steam head and was rolling along. And the questions were whether it would be the 2 areas together, whether it would be each separately, whether there'd be a separate one down, even in Alameda. A lot of determination of where the boundaries were going to be. Would you like to take from there for a little bit?
Well, the Lakewood map was drawn in my basement on a ping pong table with a felt pen. And the individual who wound up as the first mayor of Wheat Ridge, mother lived about 32nd or thereabouts in Youngfield, or not Youngfield, Kipling.
Close to Kipling.
And he called me at home and asked if he could come over, and I said sure. And so he came over and he said, Jim, my mother lives right here at 32nd and Kipling. Would you mind redrawing that boundary so she can be in Wheat Ridge? I said sure. So.
Ours wasn't quite that simple, although we didn't have questions about southern boundaries and northern boundaries in addition to areas. But we had drawn a prospective area into Wheat Ridge, and I think it was Ed Post in northern part of Lakewood and the Applewood Knolls area let us know that that area did not want to be part of Wheat Ridge. It felt it was Lakewood. So we actually sent people down and polled every house in the Applewood Knolls area and determined they didn't want to be in Wheat Ridge. Well, if they didn't want to be in Wheat Ridge, we didn't want to include them in the incorporation and have them cause a problem for it, so they were immediately drawn out. And at the same time, there was a group up east of Ridge Home that asked to be drawn in because, I guess it was west of Ridge Home, over between and Ward. And they asked to be drawn in because Arvada had them scheduled as industrial and they wanted to stay residential. So they were drawn in. But then we got kind of touchy because we had the chairman of the incorporation was Ed Anderson. And of course, none of you ever heard of Ed Anderson before. But he was a very person who was stickler for detail. Everything had to be perfect. He was a lawyer. His nightmare was that we would get incorporated and somebody'd file a suit and the whole thing would be reversed. So we had to do everything perfectly. We couldn't make any mistakes. We had to have a legal description of the boundaries of the city of Wheat Ridge. No drawing it on a ping pong table. We had a surveyor who came out and surveyed the boundaries of the city of Wheat Ridge. And I have a copy of that legal description just for you to see, even at a distance. It's hilarious what I do with it. Did I get it? So, well, anyway, it took a while. And people were getting nervous because at this point, Lakewood had sort of let it be known that all of Wheat Ridge would be part of Lakewood. And we'd have loved having Lakewood be our southern boundary and our neighbor, but we didn't want to be Lakewood's north neighborhood. I've lost it. So, well, anyway, I thought I had that here. I don't know what it is. But it's a legal sheet of paper with this legal description in the fine print of a legal notice out of the Sentinel. It was that large. And so anyway, getting this done took a long period of time, and we kept getting so nervous that Lakewood would file ahead of us, because if Lakewood filed and had its election first and it passed, Wheat Ridge was history, and all of the total vote of Wheat Ridge, if it was a popular issue, could not have defeated the Lakewood incorporation. So it appeared to us that what we had to do was get ours in first and get our elections scheduled, and then go from there. So that was our aim. And all this time, we're getting more nervous and more nervous because the blasted legal description isn't done yet. So finally, when it was all done, then it was time for us to actually get our act together, get our petitions going. And we had this, again, the stickler for detail. We had all these maps that had to be part of the petition for incorporation. You can't imagine. I think it weighed 15 pounds by the time it all got together. Now, has anybody in this room ever run for office or taken part in a petitioning process or any of that kind of thing, or is this kind of thing? Some of you have. So, well, as you know, you usually you make out a petition, and then you can have any number of copies made of it, and people go out and petition, and you usually have several weeks to get this done. Well, that wasn't the way we had to do it there, because we were nervous about time. So we had 2 petitions, and as I say, they weighed about 15 pounds by the time all the maps and everything had to be in them. And then we were ready to start. This was a year when it rained. Every time you turned around, it was raining. There were about 4 elections that spring, and every time it was pouring rain. It got to where the Sentinel had this picture of an old fisherman with the rain dripping off him that accompanied all the articles on incorporation and everything else. And that, when it came time to go out and do our petitioning, of course it was pouring rain. We felt we didn't have any time. But we had a group of people who had a very meticulous plan for getting things done. They publicized it quite well, and at that time, anything that had to do with incorporation went into the paper very easily. So we had good coverage in actually 2 papers. So the system was set up. We had one man his name was John McElderry, who was a preacher. And of course, as you know, preachers kind of like an audience, and he was no exception. We started out with 2 petitions. One was to stay in Ed Anderson's office, and a lady named Pat Richardson was to be the witness, and it was not to be out of her sight until it was filed. The other one I was to be the witness on, and it was not to be out of my sight until it was filed. Well, we set up a card table in the back of a van, a little VW bus owned by a fellow named Bill McBride, who was a jolly 300-pound fellow who imbibed a little here and there, but he was always good-natured and he always had a good time. So he drove. I was in the back seat with the card table. They had specified areas of the city publicly where they would have the petition would be at a different corner at a different time and would cover the whole city. In this pouring rainstorm, we were in the van, and ahead of us was a car with Reverend McElderry, Reverend John they called him, and a bullhorn, which he loved. So he's out broadcasting to the world that Wheat Ridge petition for incorporation will be at the next corner at X number of times, or in 5 minutes, or in 10 minutes, and then it will be here. And he did this all afternoon. When we finally finished in the evening, we had met every place, and all along the way, what has stuck in my mind for all these years, we'd drive up to a corner, and here was this mass of people standing in the rain, in different colored slickers and raincoats and umbrellas, standing in the rain, waiting for the petition to come to sign the petition to incorporate Wheat Ridge. At the end of the day, we went over to McDonald's and relaxed over a hamburger, and then went back over to Ed's office and assumed we were going to leave this massive petition there. And he said, "Oh no, you take it home with you. You're the witness. You're responsible for this until tomorrow morning." And this was all done in one day. So I can't remember ever having been that nervous about having something in my house. But I had the petition signed, ready to file, and I was responsible for it till the next day. Well, we were picked up. Ed came by around 9 o'clock in the morning, and the whole shebang of us went over to the county, and we filed the petitions. And of course, the immediate question was, has Lakewood filed yet? And thankfully, Lakewood had not filed. It did a week later. We each had our petitions and our elections a week apart. But the interesting thing about this petitioning process was that from the time the first petition went on it until the time that it was filed at the court in Golden was less than 24 hours. And I don't know that that will ever happen anywhere again. So,
well, the Lakewood experience was a little bit different in a sense that we didn't know what to call this effort. We didn't want to alienate any geography. For example, we had an Alameda area that was very popular, and Green Mountain, and we didn't want to go with Lakewood and have the people in these other areas upset. So we came up with the bright idea of filing under the name Jefferson City. I don't know if many of you realized that that was the first name of Lakewood, was Jefferson City. We went to the county, filed the name. The election took place. No one liked Jefferson City. The election took place in August. We had a follow-up election because of the state statutes in November of the same year. And we had an advisory ballot in terms of changing the name. And Lakewood passed in every precinct overwhelmingly. So that's how we got from Jefferson City to Lakewood. The original candidates were unbelievable. We had 113 candidates for 13 offices. Met in old Villa Italia, had card tables set up all over the place. I think we had more candidates than they had business at that time, but they were very kind to make available the mall. And we realized as a part of that experience that a major part of the shoppers in that area were not residents of either Wheat Ridge or what was to be Lakewood. I don't know how I wound up as a candidate, other than the fact that I had been chair of the incorporation committee, and the night of the election, in drinking champagne, I must have gotten overwhelmed or something, and somebody yelled, "There's the mayor, there's the next mayor." There were 6 people that ran, of the 113 that ran for mayor. I had been on the Jefferson County School Board not too many years prior to that, and I still had friends in the administration and also on the board. And the building at 1580 Yarrow, that's now the Clements Senior Center, was the old administration building for the school district. And they had moved out and they put that on the market. I had told some, or asked some of my friends in the school system during the summer of '69 before the election, I said, "Hey, don't get carried away with selling that building, because if I happen to be elected mayor, I want to negotiate with you for that building for City Hall." So sure enough, they didn't sell it, and sure enough, I was elected, and so I made contact, and it was on the market for $300,000. I said, I guess the first thing we ought to do is get an up-to-date appraisal. So we did, and the appraisal came in at 180,000. So I said, you know, I got to thinking, Lakewood, we represent about 40% of the bricks and mortar of Jefferson County. So technically, we've already paid for 40% of that building. So we ought to reduce it by 40. So they said, okay. So we were down to, I think, 140 something or whatever math was. I said, you know, we've got another problem. We don't have any money. Could we pay for that building over 7 years at no interest? They said, okay. So that's how we bought the original City Hall. And I think probably, to say several million have been spent on that building and remodeling and so on. But I was wise in the knowledge of running a city. And I said to myself, we'll never use that entire building, 1580 Yarrow. So I went out to the GSA and asked them to, if they would consider leasing the upstairs of the building. Fortunately, they said no, because it didn't take very long to fill it up. The waking up one morning after an election and having almost 100,000 people as a new city and not having any employees, not having any ordinances, not having any rolling stock, it was a little bit of a scary experience. But we just took the city council and we met almost on a nightly basis at different school cafeterias, putting 200 plus pounds on a little elementary school stool in the cafeteria. It was not an easy job, but some way we made it through. And we probably made a wrong mistake in that I, along with one other person that was on the council, we had a lot of enthusiasm directed toward developing a police department from scratch. And we thought that this was a unique opportunity to perhaps soften the image of a police organization, do some things differently. So we hired a chief police before we hired a city administrator. And if we had to do over again, it'd be the other way around. But that all started in the summer of '69. I wound up being elected in August of '69, and about 2 weeks later announced for re-election. As I say, we were a statutory city, and by state statutes you had to have an election in November of the odd year. Well, that was the odd year. So 2 weeks after being elected, I said, I'm a candidate for re-election.
It's interesting. All of the things that the state law required for statutory cities. Excuse me. You had 90 days to come up with a full working framework for a city. And that meant having a police department, a court system, zoning laws, building laws, the works, which would be, excuse me, would be a task for a full operating staff at the best of things. And we were like Lakewood. We didn't have any staff. There was one person in the city office, and that was yours truly. And our office, we didn't have a building. We had the semi-finished basement of a bank building on 38th Avenue. And the total belongings to the city at that point were 2 file cabinets, a table, some folding chairs. I had hoped for a typewriter for the clerk's office, and we went over to the place where you could get governmental things rather inexpensively and so forth, and it was on the list of things, a typewriter for the clerk's office, and they discovered they could get lights for a potential police car, and the typewriter went down the drain in a hurry. So the clerk bought a typewriter at a garage sale and used that. We had no means of reproducing anything. And today, for any office to operate without a copy machine is unheard of. Well, somewhere along the way, a fellow named Walt Johnson, who was a retired colonel and very unmilitary appearing, a very efficient person who could do anything, actually talked the Chamber of Commerce into giving us a mimeograph machine that the chamber was going to discard because nobody could use it. And Walt not only got it, he figured out how to use the darn thing. So we operated with a mimeograph machine. Well, we had no secretaries, we had no police chief. One of our councilmen became the police chief. It was like 3 or 4 months before we hired a couple of secretaries, and I got a deputy clerk, and boy, did life get easier in a hurry. When you have one person in an office, and one of the requirements, every time an ordinance was passed, it not only had to be published, it had to be posted in Wheat Ridge in each district. So we had to go out and post these copies in 6 places. Well, it's hard to keep the office open and be gone. So once in a while I could find a volunteer to come in and keep the office open while I went out and posted the notices. And another little interesting sidelight, the morning after the incorporation election, the Sentinel changed the name of the Jefferson Sentinel, and there was a Wheat Ridge Sentinel and a Lakewood Sentinel, and they brought us a copy of the first Sentinel saying incorporation passes. But what they hadn't thought about in between was that if they hadn't had a second-class mailing permit for 6 months, they couldn't be the legal paper for the city of Wheat Ridge. So we had to do our publishing in a paper in Arvada, which was a long way up there when you had to rush and get back. So we had all these little fun things. But we did have the same problems of having to set up the full city in 90 days, and we met twice a week till roughly 2:30 in the morning. And then try to get back by 8:30 in the morning. It'd be kind of short nights sometimes. One night, the day after the first meeting that went that late, I got a call bright and early at the office saying, from the wife of one of the councilmen, saying, "Louise, what time did that meeting let out last night?" So I told her the truth, and a little later when her husband came in, I said, "Boy, I sure could have gotten you in trouble." But we did meet long, long, long hours, and we survived it.
Special districts, seems like I'd read something about something going on with special districts recently, but I don't know if you realize, but back in '69, you could form a special district by going to McDonald's with 2 or 3 people, and before you had your coffee drank, you had a special district. We had 300 and some special districts in the new city of Lakewood. I brought them together, the boards of directors, in the old Lakewood Junior High building at 10th and Wadsworth, and they literally filled the auditorium. These were 5 to 7 people boards, and a lot of those boards had never met any of the other people. Plus the boards didn't really know, this is hard to believe, but it was the truth, they didn't know what areas they serviced. Well, we prevailed on them to make some reorganizations, and were pretty successful doing it, except for the fire districts. And Lakewood had a all paid district, paid payroll, and Bancroft had a volunteer, and they were very proud of both organizations. It was 20-some years after I had left office before West Metro was finally brought together. I think that was the last of the major bringing together of special districts. But there were a lot of things that took place that you wouldn't think about. And the big snowstorm that we just had, I was reminded that in September of 1969, over Labor Day, we had about a 20-inch snowfall, and limbs fell all over the city, and we had, as I say, we had no rolling stock and no employees. So Lakewood's trash collection was private people, and I asked a group of them to meet over at my home, and we met, and they agreed that they would furnish the equipment to pick up these tree limbs if we could furnish the people to throw them in the back. Well, we had no people, so the city council and the mayor became those people that walked by in these trash trucks throwing these limbs in the deal. So while I can empathize with Mayor Burkholder and Mayor Hickenlooper and other mayors at the snowstorm, they didn't see what we saw.
And we did the same thing. The trash collectors furnished the trucks and the driver, but our councilman and our mayor and our treasurer, they were all men at that time, but we didn't have quite as many, but they were out loading up the trucks, and somehow we all survived it. But it put you in rather close contact with the people, and they really did appreciate it. Nobody complained. So,
You know, before we run out of time, I'd like to be sure we allow some time for questions of anything that might be on your mind. There are no secrets. The history doesn't change. We just have to lie a little bit. Who's got a question about anything at all?
Come on, you guys were the ones that said you wanted time for questions, so I
we can't have answered everything. So.
Yes, ma'am.
With so much bureaucracy back then, do you think it was going? Do you think that's increased today? So much paperwork and bureaucracy?
I can't quite hear you. Can you talk real loud?
With so much bureaucracy back then to get the city started, with so many rules and regulations, do you think that we've improved upon that, or do you think it's worsened?
I would think there's more bureaucracy today than there was then. I know one thing that's different today, dramatically different in the world of politics, is the fun element. I guess I'd call it fun. As I say, I was on the Jefferson County School Board in the 50s, and it was a fun experience in the sense that the administration, the teachers, the parents, the kids, the board, we were all going the same way. And it was just a proud organization you were very proud of. I don't think I would have had near the fun. It was a challenge, but I don't think I would have had near the fun running an organized city as it was putting a city together. I'm not sure you could draw a city map on a ping pong table today. I just feel like that the challenge of being a candidate for office today has got to be overwhelming. I don't see how anyone comes to grips with the fact that they want to be whatever they want to be.
Well, just to pick up a little bit on that, people coming into office in Wheat Ridge today have a code book. I would say it's close to 3,000 pages. Another probably 3,000 pages in master plans, in all manner of things that are past decisions of past councils. We didn't have any of that. There were no records. We started the records. We kept, boy, every scrap of paper was valuable because there was nothing behind it. But there was an excitement in it that people don't have today. There was a lot of anxiety, a lot of nervous moments. There were times when things seemed to be, what do we do now kind of thing. I can remember one night when there was something the council needed to act on that the treasurer had to take, goodness knows where, by 9:30 in the morning. And they all of a sudden got ornery and said, we're not going to do that, and adjourned the meeting. Well, this was not right at the first, but maybe 4 years into it, while things were still kind of elementary. And I was on the council, and the city clerk, of course, was at the meeting. The treasurer was a little frantic, and there was some way that 3 elected officials could call a special meeting. And the treasurer said, well, you've got to do it. He said, we have to call a meeting for 7:30 in the morning. Well, you know, how do you let 8 councilmen know you're going to have a meeting at 7:30 in the morning when they've just gotten out of a meeting at about 2 o'clock? So we had a patrol car, and the city clerk and I were designated to call on every councilman and give him a notice of a special meeting at, you know, a few hours down the road. Well, as you can well imagine, we weren't terribly popular. But we got it done, and we had the meeting, and whatever it was that Jim Malone, our treasurer, had to have by 9:30, he got. But those little things, you know, interesting little things happen along the way.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm a newcomer to this area, in about 3 years. So I'm curious about how you talk about how people came to Jefferson County to escape Denver. Because right now Denver and Jefferson County are like this.
Mhm.
So how long did it take to get to Wheat Ridge, where I
Oh, we were just right across Sheridan from Wheat Ridge, but there was a whole difference in city life and county life. And everybody in Jefferson County, it was horse capital USA, and people loved seeing the orchards and the horses, and these things were things they wanted to preserve. And this was the challenge of converting. And they liked having the volunteer firemen. They were very close to the volunteer firemen. They'd say, oh, if you called an ambulance, it would take 20 minutes to get there. If you called the fire department, they would be there in 2 or 3 minutes. So there was this closeness. We had floods on 38th Avenue for years, and it was the people from the fire district and the sewer district that were out there directing traffic so people could get through 38th Avenue. And it was just a whole different thing. And it was a resistance that people overcame because they wanted the protection of not being taken into. Things they specified all along the way. We don't want curbs and gutters and sidewalks. We want to keep our rural streets. They're cheap to maintain and we like them. We don't want to have street lights. And we know that if we go into Denver, we will be forced to have street lights. Well, at that time, you could go to a high spot in Arvada and look around the countryside, and here's this black spot with no lights. But people liked it. They could see by the lights of their cars and so forth. So there were a lot of little things. The horses were another very strong issue. And they said, well, if we can incorporate ourselves, this was what swayed a lot of people who said, status quo. We're not going to have part of any of this incorporation. But they said, we don't really have a choice. Right now, if we say no to Wheat Ridge Incorporation, we will be part of Lakewood. And we may, before all this, we may still be part of Denver. But if we are incorporated as our own community, we have a better chance of keeping the kind of life we want. And if we don't, we've done it to ourselves rather than having somebody else inflict it on us. But Denver was right there, but people, it was just sort of a thing. If you got tired of city life, you came to Jefferson County, and Jefferson County was wonderful. So I don't know if that answers it.
Yes, sir.
You folks had a lot to do with the forming of your cities. Are you happy with what your cities look like today?
You want to answer that?
I'm happy. I think Lakewood, it's unbelievable how the city has matured and the differences and taken on a leadership role within the metro area, not just a passive role. I'm particularly pleased with the way that public safety of the police department has developed. I think the last statistic I heard, Lakewood has about 70 chiefs around the country, many around Colorado. You can't hardly leave our geography without coming into an alum from Lakewood's Department of Public Safety, so that's developed well. I read the paper, I can't think of the name of it, Steve, that published periodically, the one that most recently had the segment on snow removal. What's it called? Yeah. It had a extremely good article about snow removal and answering citizens' questions. A lot of that is what I call proactive work, where you get the message out before the people jump on City Hall. But answer the question, yes.
Among the other things that were very, very important to us were keeping our name, because we liked being Wheat Ridge. We wanted very much to keep our fire district. We still have our fire district. We have our own post office. Wheat Ridge had its own post office starting clear back in 1913. And we don't have an 802 zip like all the ones that came through the Denver post office. Sounds kind of ridiculous now, but at the time, this was important too, because people did like keeping their identity. So we have kept our name, and we've kept our identity, and we've kept some small bit of our former way of life, but things change and you don't always have choices. And I don't think people realize the pressures that are on the city governments. Initially, and our people were thinking we don't need a lot of laws. Well, you're right in the midst of the municipal league. Well, the joy of the municipal league is getting people to pass laws and having every city have all of the same laws. So they're there with all the laws you need to pass. COG is there with all of the projects and saying, well, we'll give you money for this project, whether you want it or not, and so forth. So there are a lot of things that people maybe weren't particularly happy with, but they're happy to be Wheat Ridge and would not, would certainly not change it for anything else at this point in time.
Take one more question. Yes, sir.
Just Wheat Ridge in particular. We got the name Wheat Ridge, and yet the history I know is about it being the former carnation capital of the U.S. and a lot of apple orchards. So how did we get our name?
There were wheat fields on the ridge. Does that sound a little? Sounds a little corny, doesn't it? But we did. This whole area was kind of a market basket for the miners. They used that term a lot because it was all agricultural. And yes, there was wheat. So.
Where is that ridge located?
Roughly where Crown Hill Park is, that's one of the high areas. And then if you look at a topographic area of it, that's high, and then it slopes on down to Clear Creek. But yeah, but they were scattered all through. And I think one of the early settlers named Lee was given credit for giving it the name. And there was always some question about, is it 2 words or 1 word? Because you saw both. A lot of the districts that formed it with the spelling in 1 word, which was fine. They could call their districts anything they wanted to. It is officially 2 words because that's the way it was registered in the United States Post Office. And I was a little horrified one day when I walked into our post office and they had a big sign up, Wheat Ridge something or other, and they had spelled it in 1 word. And I thought, well, okay, so they don't know. But that was where the name part came in.
38 years since 1969, a lot of things that you see and take for granted in Lakewood, they didn't just happen. Things like the park system that's here now, the Kipling extension, which was an extremely controversial deal, that little extension of Estes from Jewel, it went down to Morrison Road. That was a tough one. You got the Fox Hollow Golf Course, the Belmar that is so positive in the system. So it all feeds back to your question about are you happy or not. I think one of the things that I am particularly happy with is the succession of mayors that have taken place since I was in office. And the present mayor is just, in my judgment, done an outstanding job. And I hate to see his tenure end. but it is going to end much like our session's going to end right now. It's been fun. Thanks.
I think
I'll
you see
take
what I
one-
mean. These are
let me
these are
take
great
one
people.
section.
Certainly. We are so fortunate, and I'm going to step a little outside the bounds here and say, are there any final remarks that you might want to make, Jim, Louise? You know, you've done this for quite a few years now, and this is such an integral part of what we do here. Because I think before you can move forward, you have to understand your heritage, and that's really important that you never forget your heritage. So, any final remarks?
Go ahead.
And the only thing I can think about is I mark the fact that I come back each year, that some way I've survived one more year.
Well, I think we feel very honored that you ask us because it's fun for us. This is something that's close to our hearts, and you know, we were very privileged because not everybody has the chance to be part of an incorporation drive of a city and then see that city flourish and so forth. But we were also blessed with having been part of the first part of it and watching it develop. And, you know, it's something that very few people have the chance to experience. So we're more than happy to share it with you. And we appreciate being asked, and thank you very much.
Let's give him a hand again.